my plan to dismantle the deep state and reclaim our democracy.
The deep state is real, and it's been around for a long time.
Happy birthday, Mr. President.
This was an iconic moment in American culture. But what happened later that night at a private cocktail party in New York was far more consequential in shaping the course of American history. A shadowy figure, largely unnoticed to the public, found her way to the highest circles of power. Not Marilyn Monroe, but someone more sinister. Her story is one of three that we will explore that reveal the true nature of the deep state and why it supports Israel. Her story will come later. First, we will start with the father of the modern deep state. Before we dive deeper, a special thank you to our supporters on Patreon for making videos like this possible. Doing this work takes time, resources, and editorial independence. And we're only able to do that thanks to you guys, our community. So if you believe in what we're doing and want to be a part of it, you can join our Patreon. It's how we keep this channel running. And now back to the deep state.
Here's my plan to dismantle the deep state and reclaim our democracy from Washington corruption. We will clean out all of the corrupt actors in our national security and intelligence apparatus, and there are plenty of them.
When people think of the deep state, they think CIA, and there's a reason for that. The CIA has a history of operating in the shadows without any oversight or accountability. And that is because of Allen Dulles, the most influential director of the CIA. His story doesn't only reveal the origins of the deep state, but also what makes it tick: big money. Before his time at the CIA, Allen Dulles was a Wall Street lawyer, a partner at Sullivan & Cromwell, the most powerful firm on Wall Street. Dulles is what they called back then as a blue blood or an aristocrat. He came from the highest levels of New York society. There were 3 secretaries of state in his own family, including his own brother, John Foster Dulles. The CIA often recruited from this upper class, people who didn't think they were just serving America, people who thought they were America.
Saw himself and his elite group as the proprietors of American democracy, that democracy was too important to be left in the hands of mere people like you and me. And so his group, which encompassed very powerful people on Wall Street and in Washington, were the gatekeepers, the guardians of our democracy.
For Dulles, the CIA wasn't just an intelligence agency. It was his entitlement to rule by any means necessary. And at the heart of that was doing the bidding of big money, corporate power, and America's elite. To give you a sense of who we are dealing with, back when he was a Wall Street lawyer, Dulles would defy presidential directives and do business with Nazis in Germany just because it was good for the bottom line and his clients. That didn't change when he became head of the CIA. What Dulles celebrated as his biggest achievements were all done on behalf of Wall Street and corporate power, some even on behalf of his former clients.
Now, there are times when the United States government feels that the developments in another government is of a nature to imperil the safety and the security and the peace of the world, and asks the Central Intelligence Agency to be its agent in that particular situation.
The ancient kingdom of Persia, rich only in legend and undeveloped natural resources.
In 1953, the CIA orchestrated a coup in Iran against the democratically elected prime minister because he wanted to nationalize Iran's oil, directly challenging Western access to Iran's natural resources. Allen Dulles and the CIA didn't like that, so they replaced him with the Shah, a pro-Western dictator who was brutal and secured foreign access to Iran's oil. This wasn't an isolated incident. In 1954, the CIA conducted another coup, this time in Guatemala, on behalf of the United Fruit Company, a corporation Dulles used to represent during his time at Wall Street. The coup triggered decades of civil war and brutal military rule, all to benefit and protect corporate profits under the guise of anti-communism. Allen Dulles and the CIA then did the same thing in the Congo. When US and Western mining interests were being threatened, they overthrew and assassinated Patrice Lumumba.
Comes back to Leopoldville a prisoner.
His crime? For wanting the people of Congo to benefit from their natural resources.
Mr. Dulles, I know you've heard this many times, that there are people who say that we, with regard to the CIA, are waging a secret war with an invisible government.
The CIA is one faction of the deep state. It's the shadowy arm that extends around the world to destabilize countries and exert dominance. So when we say deep state, people only think of the CIA and nothing else. But as we see with Dulles, there's no deep state without big money. It plays a fundamental role in shaping and directing the actions of American power behind closed doors. The definition of the deep state is a vast network of entrenched institutions and powerful individuals that control a country's policy, both inside and outside of government. And Allen Dulles was a bridge between both. He was the father of the modern deep state, until one day he overstepped. His final straw was Cuba. Then President John F. Kennedy fired Allen Dulles for misleading him over the Bay of Pigs invasion. As you can imagine, Dulles wasn't happy. He already hated JFK for wanting to limit the power of the deep state and for potentially wanting to shut down the CIA. And that is why it is believed many years later that the deep state, led by Allen Dulles, was responsible for assassinating JFK and covering it up.
Allen Dulles would never have acted on his own against the president, who he despised. He always acted on behalf of his wealthy and powerful clients, that he was backed by people who were very powerful in the national security state and on Wall Street, where he'd spent most of his career.
This was one of the most consequential moments in American history, and it sets the stage for our next character. A woman who was instrumental in paving the way for the deep state's support for Israel, and it all started shortly before JFK was killed. Arthur Krim, a powerful film executive and the head of the Democratic Party Finance Committee, was behind that JFK star-studded gala. Later that night, the Krims hosted an after-party at their home. In the Krims' living room, the Kennedys were surrounded by Hollywood's elite, politicians and financiers. But not everybody was enjoying the party. A quiet figure sat off to the side on a stairwell, alone, observing the scene from above. It was no other than Vice President Lyndon B. Johnson. Someone noticed him lurking on the stairwell, and shortly after joined him. And what started as a simple conversation soon turned into a close and very influential relationship with no other than Matilda Krim.
Climbed halfway up a set of stairs and sat down and was looking to the crowd from above. And I thought, this is not fair, you know, somebody should pay attention to the vice president. And I sat next to him on the stair. And we had the first conversation there. And that night I admired him for his ability to stand back, you know, to let the Kennedys enjoy the evening and be the stars of the evening.
Matilda Krim is no ordinary socialite and has a very interesting history. As a student at the University of Geneva, she embraced the Zionist cause. She even converted to Judaism after marrying David Danon, a man exiled from Palestine for his ties to the Irgun, a violent terrorist organization that was operating in British-controlled Palestine. As the Palestinian Nakba was unfolding in 1948, Matilda Krim was running weapons smuggling operations for the Irgun in France. After divorcing Danon, she married Arthur Krim and moved to the US and quickly became one of the key players in American politics. Krims were more than just close friends with LBJ, they were amongst his closest allies. They often would vacation together and stay at each other's homes, and that's when the rumors started to swirl that Matilda Krim was LBJ's lover.
The fact that I spoke several languages and that I was a PhD. And that, by, in his mind, I think, gave me a certain credit to start with. And then he was impressed by the fact that I lived in New York. I moved in the entertainment industry, you know, which to President Johnson was another world too, of elegance and sophistication. So the mix of all these things with me was considered very attractive to him.
Remember, Matilda Krim is a hardcore Zionist and a former member of the Irgun, and was a part of Israel's influence network in the US, and she had a close relationship with the vice president. This was a Zionist strategy from the early days of the pro-Israel lobby. Get to politicians early in their careers, build personal relationships, influence their thinking, and even sometimes fund their campaigns.
Perfected an already an American idea of how to lobby. That is targeting politicians from an early stage of their career, making sure that in every walk of life they have a presence where there is even this modicum of potential that someone might influence the American policy towards Israel.
And so here we are, to set the scene. JFK just got assassinated and LBJ became president. Matilda's personal relationship continued and shaped his views and thinking on Israel.
During his administration, I know that that he relied upon Arthur for advice on a good many things. Yeah. But I think that in addition to that, he relied on you separately for advice and counsel. I know he sought out your feelings on a number of things.
Well, I don't know if that was justified, but you see, President Johnson was a very complex person. Very complex. And yes, he did consult me, and in fact he asked me to help him on certain occasions.
It was no coincidence that his commitment to Israel was unprecedented for an American president at the time. See, JFK had a cautious, balanced approach to the Middle East. He wanted good relations with Israel and the Arab countries. But LBJ, he went all in, cementing the so-called strategic alliance between the US and Israel that we see today. But that's not all. While Kennedy had a confrontational relationship with the Israel lobby, pushing them to register as foreign agents, under LBJ, the lobby thrived. Under his administration, the American Israel Public Affairs Committee gained a lot of influence and became one of the most dominant lobbying powers in Washington. Her relationship and personal influence with LBJ is what we now come to know as the Deep State. An elite network of individuals who use their access and power to push their agendas, and in this case, it was the agenda of the pro-Israel lobby. But what happened next is one of the most unfathomable events in American history.
On the 5th of June, 1967, Israel launched an all-out war against its Arab neighbors.
It is June 5th, 1967, 5 years from that fateful meeting on the stairwell. Lyndon B. Johnson wakes up a sleeping Matilda from her room at the White House and tells her we are at war. But the US wasn't at war, Israel was. And for some reason, the President of the United States felt that he had to wake up Matilda and let her know. And what was she doing at the White House anyways? A few days later came one of the biggest cover-ups in American history. On June 8th, Israel attacked the USS Liberty, an American Navy ship in international waters off the coast of Egypt. 34 crew members were killed and 171 were wounded. And this is where it gets a bit strange. During the attack, the USS Liberty was able to send out an SOS distress signal. A nearby fleet got the call and was scrambling to help, but they were told to stand down by a call from Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara. This was a very strange thing for the Secretary of Defense to intervene in. When another fleet tried to intervene, Lyndon B. Johnson stopped the US Navy from saving American lives. I don't give a damn, I will not embarrass my ally. And of course, he was referring to Israel. Let that sit for a second. The Secretary of Defense and the President wanted everyone to die to bury the truth, but Israel had failed to sink the ship and kill everyone. That's when the cover-up began.
While 2/3 of the crew was either dead or wounded, First thing we saw was several days later when Admiral Kidd got there, and we told him everything, what happened, and why didn't you come help us? And he says, he got beat red, and he got right in my face. He says, I'm telling you, you better never talk about this again to anybody. I'll make sure you end up in prison, fined, or worse. You know what worse means? I said, yes, sir, I do.
Survivors of the attack on the USS Liberty were threatened with death if they ever spoke out. It is speculated that the attack was planned by elements of the American deep state and Israel to pull the US into war with Egypt and its neighbors. And when it failed, the deep state chose Israel over its own people to save face and hide the truth.
When your own government betrays you, and still betrays you, and every congressman betrays you, say, what you saw you really didn't see, what you heard you really didn't hear. That's pretty bad.
Until this day, there has been no accountability or justice for the USS Liberty.
It looks like something out of a horror movie with people standing around or lying, wounded and dead and stunned.
When we take a step back, we see that Matilda Krim was by LBJ's side throughout the war, advising him on Israel and the American Jewish community like she had many times before, dictating memos, advising him on speeches, and relaying messages. While we may never know the full extent of her influence over the USS Liberty incident, what we know is, 1. The US-Israel relationship we see today was built under LBJ. 2. LBJ went to extraordinary lengths to protect Israel at the expense of American interests and American lives. 3. The Israel lobby, which struggled under Kennedy, exploded in power under LBJ, and now is one of the most dominant lobbies in American politics.
Around the time of the attack, the Washington Post had noted that the Jewish lobby could help determine the outcome of 169 of the 270 electoral votes needed to win the White House.
Matilda Krim is a perfect example of how the deep state works, operating in the shadows, manipulating power behind closed doors, without any accountability from the public.
The Israelis have always been very skillful at tracking what the U.S. government is doing, saying, thinking, and effort to influence it.
It makes you wonder, who really directs American foreign policy? Our next character answers that question.
My fellow citizens, at this hour, American and coalition forces are in the early stages of military operations to disarm Iraq, to free its people, and to defend the world from grave danger.
It's 2003, and the US is on the brink of invading Iraq. Officially, it's framed as a response to 9/11. But the war wasn't actually a reaction to an attack on American soil. It was part of a sinister plan, a decade in the making by elements of the deep state. And at the heart of it was Israel. And how did we even get here? Well, the answer lies with the mastermind of the Iraq War, Dick Cheney.
If he stays in power, has that flow of significant sums coming off oil production, some 3 million barrels a day, he will devote those resources to rebuilding his biological, chemical, and nuclear program as soon as nobody's watching any longer. That's been his pattern for over 20 years, and there's no reason to believe it would be any different in the future.
Dick Cheney had long been a key player in the American deep state, serving in positions from White House Chief of Staff to Vice President and everything in between. But before Cheney became Bush's VP, he was the CEO and chairman of Halliburton, one of the world's largest oil and defense companies. Cheney was the embodiment of Washington's revolving door, a man moving seamlessly from powerful government roles to the private sector, often overlooking conflicts of interest to scratch the backs of his benefactors. Were corporate interests part of Cheney's fervent push for the Iraq War? Most certainly. Halliburton ended up receiving $39.5 billion in government contracts in Iraq following the invasion.
Just as I did when we made the decision to go into Iraq in 2003. I believed in it then. I look back on it now, it was absolutely the right thing to do.
Cheney was the modern-day Allen Dulles. Like Dulles, Cheney believed in American supremacy, and that would go hand in hand in promoting the interests of big money globally. And in this case, it was oil and defense. This belief was part of Cheney's ideological makeup, what is known as neoconservatism, or the neocons for short, an important faction within the network of the American deep state. The neocons believe that the US should use its military, economic, and political might to maintain global dominance, and it saw the Middle East and its oil as essential for that vision. And Israel would be their key ally in what they painted as a grand battle between good versus evil.
Constitute an axis of evil, arming to threaten the peace of the world by seeking weapons of mass destruction.
And there was no doubt where Saddam Hussein fell on that axis.
Iraq continues to flaunt its hostility toward America and to support terror. The Iraqi regime has plotted to develop anthrax and nerve gas and nuclear weapons for over a decade.
See, this is the part people tend to forget. Calls for the removal of Saddam started back in the early 1990s. Cheney and the neocons saw him as an obstacle for American hegemony and access to oil in the Middle East. That's when the plan to remake the region was hatched. In the mid-1990s, neocons who had formerly served in the American government went to Israel. At the behest of then Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, these neocons were to develop a plan for regime change in the Middle East to remove any leader that was part of the axis of evil, aka anyone that was hostile to Israel. That plan was called Clean Break. It would start with Iraq and it would end with Iran. When Cheney and other neocons like Rumsfeld and Wolfowitz got into power, they saw their chance. The grand plan to remake the region was finally set in motion. And who was right there selling it to Congress? None other than Bibi Netanyahu.
You take out Saddam's regime, I guarantee you that it will have enormous positive reverberations on the region. And I think that people sitting right next door in Iran, young people, and many others will say, the time of such regimes, of such despots, is gone.
For the past 3 decades, we've witnessed the clean break strategy unfold. One government after another hostile to Israel was toppled. What started as a convenient alliance between Netanyahu and the neocons has now developed into something much more powerful.
Israel has run American foreign policy in the Middle East for 30 years. That's how it works. We have an Israel lobby. We have this clean break strategy. We have a plan for 7 wars in 5 years. We've had 6 of those 7 wars. The only one that hasn't happened is Iran.
It is now clear for everyone to see. Netanyahu and Israel have completely hijacked American foreign policy in the Middle East.
This is Netanyahu's war to remake the Middle East.
And they've done so with bipartisan support across the American establishment.
It doesn't really matter who's president. This is long-term deep state policy. Israel has driven so many American wars, and we say, absolutely, yes, that's our greatest ally. These have been at huge cost to the United States, cost of trillions of dollars, cost geopolitically, but somehow we gave away our foreign policy to Israel years and years ago, and it's been absolutely devastating.
And how did this happen? His unprecedented longevity as Israel's prime minister, combined with the support of big money and the Israel lobby, has ensured that the American deep state is firmly aligned with Israel. And what happened if you challenge this deep state?
Why are you doing this to me?
Well, you face severe consequences. Today, we are witnessing the culmination of the deep state's trajectory. From Allen Dulles to Matilda Krim to Dick Cheney, 3 figures across history that were part of shadowy networks inside and outside of government that influenced the US to take a certain path. They all lead to one man.
Here's my plan to dismantle the deep state and reclaim our democracy from Washington corruption, once and for all, and corruption it is.
First, there's big money. Trump has lauded his desire to turn Gaza into a real estate deal, or potentially access the gas off its shores. But here, the big money also seeps into the Israel lobby. Beyond the usual suspects, there's the Adelsons. They are billionaire GOP megadonors, whose vast political spending is driven by pro-Israel policy. Across the last 3 presidential elections, they've donated $250 million to Trump's campaigns, and that's the amount we know of. It has since been uncovered that Trump promised the Adelsons the recognition of Jerusalem as the capital of Israel and the annexation of the Golan Heights by Israel in return for those donations, both which he did. That was in 2016, and in 2024, it is no different. It is speculated that in return for the $100 million contribution from the Adelsons, Trump will recognize Israel's legal annexation of the West Bank. This is by definition how the deep state works. Big money getting to influence and direct a country's policy. Then there's the vast network of the Israel lobby. Look at both of Trump's administrations. He didn't drain the swamp. If anything, he made it worse. The people who shaped his governments weren't outsiders. They were part of Washington's revolving doors and the immense network of America's deep state. From his personal advisors to secretaries of state to the heads of the CIA. The Israeli lobby had been cultivating their support for decades and even boasted about their connections.
We talk about Marco Rubio and Elise Stefanik and Michael Waltz. Those 3 people have something in common. They all serve in Congress. They all have relationships with key AIPAC leaders from their communities. One of the first candidates I ever met with as an AIPAC professional in my job as being candidate for Congress was a guy named John Ratcliffe. A couple of weeks before he took the oath as the CIA director, for crying out loud.
And finally, who actually controls America's foreign policy in the Middle East? Throughout his campaign, Trump echoed his America First ideology and his desire to end foreign wars. Yet in the blink of an eye, he rushed to support Israel's violation of the ceasefire and continuing its genocide in Gaza. It is clear that Netanyahu still pulls the strings, and the clean break strategy marches on as Israel remakes the region through normalization deals, regime change, and annexing land from its neighbors. Trump is not a knight in shining armor here to fight the deep state. Like Allen Dulles, Matilda Krim, and Dick Cheney, he is the deep state. And because of that, the greatest superpower in the history of the world continues to unconditionally support a tiny rogue nation in the Middle East as it destabilizes the entire world.